Kicking off the Well, What Do You Know podcast, I'm joined by Jerry Power from Moravia, Iowa. Jerry's truly done it all. A U.S. Air Force veteran of the Vietnam War, a small-town businessman who's kept things running for more than 40 years, and a husband, dad, and grandpa who's never too busy to lend a hand or share a story. Around South Central Iowa, if something needs to get done, chances are Jerry's the one doing it. This two-part episode is full of wisdom, laughs, and a few stories you won't forget. I hope you enjoy episode 1 of Well, What Do You Know with Jerry Power. Jerry, thank you for agreeing to do this. I really appreciate it.
Hey, I'm glad to do it for you.
I tell you what, when I decided to do this, I thought of a few people that I had to interview, and you're my first one. So,
well, that's good to know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. No, I appreciate it. That's not a problem.
Always respected you and what you do for this community and for me and my family. So this was a must interview right here.
Hey, I'm happy to do it for you. I could talk for days sometimes, but I'll try to. You can say, you can just give me a throat sign. That's enough.
No, I'll just edit it later. It'll be all
okay.
right.
All right. Okay.
So Jerry, let's start way back at the beginning. Tell me about growing up, parents, siblings, anything that pops in your head.
Okay. Well, I was born on December 9th, 1945. My dad's name was John Scott Power. My mom's name was Eva Mae Stewart Power. My dad was quite a bit older than my mom, and she had actually two families because there was 18 years between my older brother and me. She had two children, Bob, who was my brother, and who also served as a kind of a surrogate dad, I guess you'd say, because he was 18 years older than I was. And he passed away at 53 of cancer. And then my sister was born, and they were born during the Depression. 1928 was my brother, 1930 was my sister. And my brother Bob, the oldest of the family, died at 53. My sister, she stayed around till 74. So then in 1942, that's why I say she kind of had two families, my brother Ronnie was born, and he was born July 4th, 1942, and then 3 years later, December 9th, 1945, I was born. On November 6th of 1946, my dad worked as a caretaker for the Centerville sewage system, which was we grew up down by the city dump and the sewage plant. And he didn't come home for dinner, or lunch, they call it now. And my brother went down there. He was 17, 18 years old. He went down there and he found my dad on his hands and knees turning a valve on one of the water, whatever he was doing, and he had had a heart attack and died. So.
And you were how old then?
I was 11 months old.
11 months.
11 months old, and so I'll tell you something too here in a minute that made me think. But my mom raised us. She couldn't find a job. She actually paid for the funeral by working at Miller's Funeral Home in Centerville. And she couldn't find a job, and we grew up on ADC, that's Aid to Dependent Children. I don't know whether that still exists or not, and some Social Security. But she had to almost physically fight the social worker back then, because I guess they pretended it was their money, and so we grew up kind of rough. But me and my brother we did a lot of stuff. Delivered paper, shoveled snow, mowed grass, always had a paper out. If we wanted to have any money, we had to work.
Right.
Just so I had a paper out when I was in the 3rd grade, and it was my spending money because Mom couldn't afford anything. So, and anyhow, what I was going to tell you was, I had a terrible temper when I was a kid. A couple of my friends, especially one, a guy by the name of Frank Caracho, used to tell me, he says, "You need to get rid of that temper. You got a terrible temper. You get mad at people over nothing." And I'd never thought about it. Why did I have such a terrible temper back in the day? And I still have. Sometimes I don't have a terrible temper, but sometimes I get upset at people and let them know it. And But anyhow, I felt like maybe I got shortchanged through no fault of my own or anybody else's. I think I got shortchanged because I didn't have a dad. And you're sitting in school sometimes, and people tell the teacher says, anybody going to do anything over the weekend? And sometimes it was, oh, we're going to Grandma's house over the weekend. We're going to see Grandpa. Dad and I are going to go fishing or something like that. And here I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, I'll be sitting at home, I guess. So anyhow, after I thought about that, this brought it to light. I thought, well, maybe it's because I felt like I was shortchanged when I grew up.
Sure.
But Mom taught me honesty and integrity. Don't lie about anything. If you know something, tell it. If you do something bad, admit it. Just tell them. Honesty and integrity. I just, I get mad at my mom. Every kid does, I think. They get upset at their mom or their dad and say some things, and my sister the same way, and my brother the same way. And, I've asked God to forgive me for some of that stuff, If I had to do it over again, I'd do it a lot different, I can tell you, But at the time, kids at that age think they know everything, and they don't know anything,
right.
So anyhow.
It's interesting that you say that about in school that, they'd be asking what you're going to do this weekend, and that brought to light your loss.
Yeah.
Did you know that they teach teachers now to not ask kids about their weekends, to not talk about summer vacation, to, don't bring any of that stuff up because of that very reason.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. And, that's tough.
Yeah.
That's tough for kids, especially a single parent or no parents at all, and living with grandma or something, which would be a good thing if they could live with grandma. But yeah, that's a good thing, I guess, that they don't bring it up.
So you mentioned your mom teaching you, you mentioned your work ethic and your mom teaching you honesty and integrity. We're jumping ahead a little bit here, but how long have you owned your insurance business now?
Since March 15th of 1984.
And as long as I've known you, so I was 10 at that time, but as long as I've known you, and you living at that yellow house on the corner there at that I always considered the corner by the school, but it was pretty far away from the school. But
superintendent's house.
Yeah, is that what it was?
Yeah.
But as long as I've known you, you've ran your business with honesty, integrity, and a work ethic that everybody should really emulate. And you're saying that comes from Mom?
Yeah.
So?
It just has to, And if I'm not going to sit here and tell you I haven't fibbed about stuff.
Sure.
If I can save somebody's feelings, I'm gonna either ignore the question or give them a bogus answer.
Right.
But if it's something, did you do that? Yes, I did. Yeah. That's what I'm going to say.
Right.
Did you? I broke a window out at the school one time. Just throwing a ball at Lincoln School. We always hung around Lincoln School in Centerville. And I throwing a ball against the brick building. It's an old brick building, 3-story building. And I threw the ball right through a kindergarten window.
Right.
And that's where I went to kindergarten. But I was in junior high probably at the time. So what do? Our principals back in the day were mostly female. And her name was Lucille Spooner. And they said, some of my buddies said, "Oh, you don't have to, don't worry about it." I said, "No," I said, I can't do that. "Why?" I said, "Because I can't." I said, "I got a conscience." And so I go up and knock on her door. And she says, "Hi, Jerry, what are you doing?" I said, "Well, I was bouncing the ball off the wall at the school, and I missed through it, and it went right through. I broke one of the windows." I said, I'll be glad to pay for it. Didn't have any money, but I figured out something. Right. So anyhow, she said, "Okay, well, that's fine. I'll have the janitor fix it." I said, "Well, I'll pay for it." And she said, "No, that won't be necessary."
Yeah.
So conscience. There's a lot of people who don't have a conscience. No. I've got one. You've got one. I know you do. And it's just the way it is. I want to look somebody in the eye. I sit at my desk sometimes and I start asking people personal questions. I said, "Please don't think I'm being nosy, because I'm not. But I want to know who you are."
Right.
I want to know who you are. And the best way is just to ask. And if you don't want to answer, that's fine.
Yep.
But I said, I'm not being nosy. I don't care what you do, as long as, you're legal and all that stuff. But I said, I just want to know who you are,
Right.
I just did a rewrite of a homeowner for a guy in Albia. This guy is just absolutely amazing. And so I started asking him questions about stuff. He's 82 or 3 years old. And he has other hobbies, and I'm serving on a board with him. That's how I got to know him, but he's also an insurance client. And it's just amazing all the stuff this guy does. I think, where do you find time to do all that? And he's had some health problems. He gets a needle in his eye. Something's wrong with one of his eyes, and he gets a needle in the eye every 3 months.
Oh.
And anyhow, I just want to know what people. I want to know what makes people tick.
Right. Right. You mentioned you went to Centerville. What was high school like for you back then?
I walked to school. You hear these stories.
Yeah.
Walked up both ways,
Right.
uphill both ways. Well, I didn't, but I walked to school. I lived in the west part of Centerville, poor section in Centerville, and it was a good thing. I had a good childhood, even though I didn't have a lot of money, or nobody else did either. But we had a good time, and I walked to Lincoln School, and I went through kindergarten to fourth grade at Lincoln School. And then for some reason, Central Ward was on Drake Avenue. So in fifth grade, Lincoln School, actually it was the first year they had fifth grade at that school.
Okay.
But I go on Drake Avenue to Central Ward for fifth and sixth grade. It was probably a good mile there anyway. And I walked all the time. I walked everywhere or rode a bicycle.
Yeah.
Then junior high, they tore the junior high down, and my seventh grade class went to school in the third floor of the high school at Centerville. And the junior college was started at that high school on the third floor, and then they moved out, and then became Indian Hills. But went to Central Ward, went to high school in seventh grade. We were the first class to graduate from Howard Junior High School. It was a brand new school,
Okay.
new cracker box gym and the whole bit, tile floor. So anyhow, somebody didn't think back then, I guess. So anyhow, went there, and it was probably a mile and a quarter home. And we used to, believe this or not, we used to go home for lunch. We had an hour for lunch, and we'd walk home.
In middle school?
Huh?
In
middle school. Yeah.
Wouldn't
And in
happen today.
No, and in high school, same thing. Went to high school, freshman, sophomore, junior, senior.
Yeah.
I was a class officer. I was a vice president of our class as seniors. Graduated in '64. I was probably in the lower half of the class, academic-wise. Any of the knowledge I got was through osmosis. So, but anyhow, I had a great time. Played sports. Never lettered in anything because I didn't have a dad that would kick me in the butt and say, "Hey, you're not quitting. You're staying."
Right.
And I didn't like to coach when I was a senior. After Christmas break, I just quit going to practice. And
Yeah.
he didn't say anything, and I didn't either. I thought we're even. So, was I a decent athlete? Yeah, I started some games and I played quite a bit, but I don't know.
What sports did you play?
Went out for football one year, sophomore year, and I didn't like it one way or the other. After basketball, baseball, I played basketball clear through my senior year, but I quit halfway through the senior year. And we lived in a house that had two stoves in it, they were wood or coal stove. And Mom finally bought a gas stove to cook on and to bake and that sort of thing. But she used to bake and stuff with this wood stove that was in the kitchen. Actually, we lived in a 4-room house, a living room, kitchen, and 2 bedrooms. We had to go outside to turn around. No, it's not that bad. But anyhow, go home after, in the middle of winter. I don't know why I didn't invest in a stocking cap or whatever, but after practice I'd go home and to walk home, and it'd be a good mile and my hair would be froze because you get in the shower. And thank goodness the school had showers, because we didn't have indoor plumbing.
Yeah.
I left in '67 when I joined the service. I got married and joined the service, and we still didn't have indoor plumbing. We still had an outhouse, and we had a big galvanized tub that was about the size of this, not quite the size of this table, that we put behind the stove.
Yeah.
And we got a bath every Saturday night, whether we needed it or not. So anyhow, that's how it was. Did I look up to some of those people that had their own room and they didn't have to worry about clothes smelling like coal smoke and that sort of thing. But overall, I tell people my age all the time, we grew up at a great time.
Yeah.
We grew up at a great time. We all, you could go to the, we used to call it the show. You go to the movies with a quarter, and you could get a box of popcorn, you get a Coke, and have a nickel left over.
Really?
Quarter. And then on Saturdays, they would have what they call cereals. Flash Gordon and Tarzan, and each week they'd have they'd cut you off at the end of the one, and then the next week you had to go back and see what happened,
Cliffhanger each week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyhow, we had a paper out that funded my stuff. My mom gave me some money from time to time, and my older brother, worked in the Quad Cities. Every once in a while he'd slip me $10 or something, which was great. But anyhow.
Yeah. What year did you graduate high school?
64.
64, and you joined the service?
I graduated from, I bought a car between my freshman and sophomore years. My brother, 3 years older than me, we bought a car together. He already had a car, but he helped me buy a car. And so the second year as a sophomore, I had a car I could drive to school. After 13 years counting kindergarten, I finally get a car, But the key to it was I had a lot of friends, had a lot of good friends, that if I had a date or something, and somebody'd say, "Who you going out with this weekend?" I'd tell them, I said, "You want to borrow my car?" I said, "Yeah." And they'd volunteer, or I'd ask them. I said, "Any chance I can borrow your car?" I borrowed my sister's car one time to go to driving with the gal, and I just had great friends, and they, some of them still. Two of them passed away in the last couple of years. Mm-hmm. They were in the morning class. In kindergarten we had morning and afternoon class. We weren't in the same kindergarten class, but we went to the same school. We became friends, and we drank beer together, and we always had a good time, no matter what. And we had some good time. We used to get into fist fights, Next day, eat lunch with us? Yeah, okay. It's one of those deals.
Right.
You don't hold grudges back then because they're your friends.
Right.
This episode of the Well, What Do You Know podcast is brought to you by P Squared Design, where your memories become keepsakes. Imagine this: Grandma's voice reading a bedtime story, even when she's miles away. At P Squared Design, we record those special moments, like grandparents reading to their grandkids, and turn them into lasting treasures. We create a beautiful bookmark with a QR code that, when scanned, plays that recording anytime, anywhere. It's story time, on demand, with the people who matter most. Visit psquareddesign.com to explore our work and start creating something unforgettable. That's psquareddesign.com. P Squared Design. Your story, your voice, your keepsake.
Welcome back to Well, What Do You Know? Let's continue our conversation with Jerry Power.
Graduated in 1964. My older brother Bob lived in the Quad Cities, had been there for about 13, 14 years. He got me a job in the summer. So four of us went up there, and they applied for jobs up there, but he got me a job where he worked, and I worked there 3 different summers. But the first summer, I didn't even I just came back for graduation. Seniors got off a week early and they had a picnic. Their senior trip was to Sharon Bluff State Park, and they cooked hot dogs.
Okay.
So went to 3 days. I was up there 3 days. I lived with them that first summer. No rent, no nothing. They were so good to me. And I would come home on the weekends. I'd grab the train and come home. But after 3 days, my brother he was on salary there, and he came home, and I said, I got something to tell you. He said, what's that? I said, I'm going back to school this fall.
Wow.
He looked at me, he says, you're getting smarter already. And so I worked there 3 different summers, and finally, let's see what happened. I came back, and after I got out of junior college, I went down to Northeast Missouri. Mm-hmm. Went 1 quarter, started the 2nd quarter. I thought, screw this, I'm not doing this. I was getting a student loan, and I thought, I don't want to do that. So anyhow, I go to the draft board. You know, you had to check in back in those days. So I go to the draft board, and it was a lady named Mary Ann Bradley, one of the nicest ladies. She sent people to die because she drafted them, and there were several around Centerville. I lost 5 classmates at Centerville Community College that I knew personally that got killed in Vietnam.
Right.
So it was on the 2nd floor of the Centerville National Bank. I went up there, knocked on the door and went in, and she knew who I was. I said, I looked at her and I said, I dropped out of school. I'm supposed to report. I said, where am I at on the draft list? She looked at me and grinned. She says, you're next. And I laughed and I said, oh my God. I said, would you give me time to enlist? And she said, yeah, I'll do that.
So, why, if you were going to be drafted? I don't understand the difference, I guess.
Well, if you get drafted, you're going in the Army.
Yeah.
I didn't think I wanted to go in the Army. Okay. I thought, 4 years in the Air Force is going to be 2 years in the Army. And as I look back, I thought, I didn't waste 2 years because I got a lot of knowledge in the military. Right. It taught me a lot of stuff. So anyhow, I was planning to get married anyway, and I went out and I told her, I said, I'm going to go over and I'm going to join. And so in February of '67, I signed up for delayed enlistment, 90 days. I get 90 days time in service, okay. Which works out at the end of the 4 years because the military has to move you. If you've got furniture or family or whatever, they have to move you.
Okay.
So I did that, and so went to basic and tech school through, in '67 I got married for the first time, and on May the 8th of '67 I went active duty. And you talk about a rude awakening, that's a rude awakening there.
Where was basic?
Basic was in Amarillo, Texas.
Oh.
Normally Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio. Mm-hmm. That's where we went to Amarillo. And one of the guys in our squadron said, Amarillo, butthole of the world and armpit of the Air Force. So anyhow, I go through basic and tech school. And I was on separate rations. What that means is I lived off base because I was married. My wife moved down there, and we rented an apartment. And so it was an admin specialist. The school was 12 weeks long, but you could go at your own rate. So some of them drag it out for 12 weeks, but 7 weeks and 2 days, I'm out of there. Wow. I get stationed to California. And McClellan Air Force Base.
This would have been about '69?
It would have been in late '67 and all of '68.
Okay.
And one interesting note is after tech school, we had to go back to one of the barracks. They had what they call a day room in every. It's a quadrangle, and there's 40 beds. There's 160 people. There's 4 dorms, and they're in a rectangle. the separate ranch had to go to a day room. We had to stay there until school, till everybody was over, 3:30, 4 o'clock, and then we could leave. So one day I'm in there, and there's about 5 or 6 of us. We're shooting pool and just, and when a sergeant or anybody comes in the room, you yell attention. Everybody stands at attention,
Right.
Then they say at ease, or they don't say at ease and make you stand there at attention. This guy's name was Tech Sergeant Gent, Gent, tall, skinny dude. He would yell we'd march from tech school back to the dorm. I mean, we marched, everybody. And if somebody was out of step, somebody's going to yell. This guy yells at me when we're marching. Power, get your shoulders up. I'm thinking, who said that? So anyhow, we get back there, and one day he walks in there. And we call attention. He said, Airman Power? I said, yes, sir. Come with me. Wonder what this is going to be. So part of this is there are people who saw more in me than I saw in myself. And it probably happened to you too, you think.
Absolutely.
So anyhow, he said, come with me. So okay, so we go to the dorm, and guys would not get on their beds. They had a maid flip a coin on it, it'd better bounce, if they ran an inspection. Guys laying on the floor and everything, and we walked in there, and I followed him in, and these guys were yelling, squadron, attention! They did. And there was guys laying on the floor half asleep. He'd jump up when they saw him, it's just kind of funny.
Yeah.
But anyway, we toured one of the barracks, 40 beds, 2 stories. We did that for about a half an hour, and we go down into a laundry room. They had a laundry room in all those barracks. You did your own laundry and that sort of thing. He looks at me and he said, you want a bottle of pop? I looked at him and thought, what's this? Why is he doing this? So he said, if you ever tell anybody, he said, I'll make you wish you hadn't. So I was half afraid of him anyway.
Right.
So anyhow, he said, when you start drinking the pop, he said, I want you to become a red rope. And I said, what? A red rope. I said, why? He said, because I think you can do it. My pants were starched. My first wife starched my pants. My boots are always spit shined. You could see your face in them.
Right.
And everything, of course we had short hair and the whole bit. So anyhow, he said, I want you to be a red rope. I looked at him and said, red rope? I said, I'm not going to be here much longer. I said, I'm about to get out of tech school. He said, I don't care. He said, I'd like for you to be a red rope. I said, I don't know if I can do that or not. The lower floor had 10 beds on the lower floor, 10 beds on the upper floor. And there were 4 of those. There was 160 people. Well, each row, 10 beds, had a green rope, okay? And then your yellow rope was the barracks. Red rope was all 4 barracks, 160 people.
Okay.
He wanted me to be a red rope. I looked at him, I said, I don't know. And to this day, I wish I'd have done it. He saw something in me that I didn't see in myself.
Right.
Anyhow, I told him, I said, I really appreciate you doing that, but I said, I don't think I'm cut out for it.
Right.
And I probably was, but I just didn't know it. So anyhow, after I got out of tech school, we moved to California. I went home for a while, came home, give you 30 days leave a year. Mm-hmm. Moved to California, McClellan Air Force Base at Sacramento, did that, and then I worked as an admin clerk in a weather reconnaissance wing. There were 2 full bird colonels in the building at all time, and my boss was a chief master sergeant. His name was Elton M. Britton. He took a liking to me. Most of the guys in the weather wing volunteered for Southeast Asia. Well, Southeast Asia meant either Thailand or Vietnam. Difference was Vietnam paid $65 more a month for combat pay in Vietnam.
Okay.
So everybody that signed up for Southeast Asia, you know where they went? Thailand. I told my wife, I said, you know what? I said, we could use that $65 a month. I said, might get shot at, but who? I said, I don't know. So I didn't volunteer. I didn't volunteer for Southeast Asia because the ones that didn't volunteer, they went to Vietnam. I thought, let's take our chances and see if I can go to Vietnam. Wow. You know, $65, that's a lot of money back then. So anyhow, 2 or 3 weeks later, here we go. You're assigned, you're going to Postal Courier School in Biloxi, Mississippi. So we had bought a Volkswagen. We drove out there in this old 60 Chevy that we bought in Amarillo, Texas. And we traded it into this Volkswagen dealer in Sacramento, and we drove to Nevada. It was close to Nevada. Mm-hmm. We signed the papers in Nevada to avoid California sales tax back in the day.
Okay.
Crazy. But anyhow, we get in the Volkswagen, we go home. We went home once during the summer. There was a kid from Centerville by the name of Tom McKenna who we became good friends. He was a year behind me in school. We knew each other, but we became good friends. I mean, we drank a lot of beer later, mm-hmm. you know, and and we were stationed there. So his wife came back with us when we came back to Iowa for a couple of weeks and then go back. We drove that Volkswagen. I tell you what, I don't know if you ever drove a boat or not, but you go down some of those hills in the mountains and it's scary.
Yeah.
So
you wonder if you have the power to get back up there later.
I know it. You didn't think it would go. So anyhow, I got orders for Vietnam, but I had to go TDY, temporary duty, to Biloxi, Mississippi for Postal Courier School. I was down there for, I think, 2 weeks maybe. And so on January 5th, I was a report to Vietnam. You know, everything's, you know, they got your plane tickets. They know where you're going, and right. they have everything ready for you. So I arrived over there, and it was at night, and you get off, and you know, these were civilian aircrafts. Some of those guys in Vietnam came over in boats, and that would be horrible. The plane ride was bad enough. But you get off the plane, you start looking around, and said, there ain't snipers out there. You know? Right. You have no idea what to expect, you know, but it was a pretty safe base. I was stationed in Vietnam at APO 96316, which was Tuiwa. I was there for 349 days. Wow. But anyhow, in August, we got to go on R&R. And R&R was Australia, Thailand, Hong Kong, or Hawaii. So I met my wife in Hawaii. When I went down on the flight line to get on a plane, I had to fly out of Da Nang, which is northern up by the DMZ. As I was sitting there waiting for the plane to arrive and take off, a C-130, I saw a captain walk in off the flight line, and I thought, my gosh, that looks like Denny Little. He was a captain in the Army. And so our eyes met about the same time, and we both looked shocked, and I grabbed a hold of him and hugged him, and I said, I didn't know whether to salute you or what. And he says, no, you don't salute me here. So, and we chatted for a few minutes, and I told him goodbye. It was good to see him and all that. He was 2 years older than me, but we knew each other very well.
You met in high school?
That was.
You met him in high school?
He was 2 years. Yeah, he was a senior when I was a sophomore.
Wow. And you saw him. Where were you at that time?
I was at Tuiwa. I was sitting there waiting for we flew at 130s back then, and they just basically they also were gunship. Some of them were gunships. Yeah. They had Gatling guns alongside of them. They could clear a field out. But anyhow, this 130, there's no seats in it. You sit on the floor of the airplane. You know, there'd be 50, 60 people in there, and we flew up to Da Nang. But so we get up to Da Nang, and in Vietnam, you couldn't have green. You couldn't have green money. You couldn't have U.S. money. Okay. So they gave us MPCs. It looked like monopoly money, but it was, it was printed well. Right. And so when I got to Da Nang, I was standing in line to get my MPC turned into green. Green was worth about 5 times what, if you had a 20, it was worth 100 over there. So anyhow, I'm standing in line waiting to get and somebody yelled my name. And I thought, yeah, maybe I misunderstood what they said, or maybe something else. And so I just stood there. I didn't look straight ahead. Like, in the military, you just kind of keep your nose straight ahead.
Right.
So anyhow, they yelled it again. And I looked over my left shoulder, and there was a guy that I played basketball with in high school. I was in his house a couple of times before games eating supper. Steve Gronert. And he yelled and he says, "Come here." And I said, "I got to get my money changed." He says, "I'll take care of it. Don't worry about it." This guy was a Navy medic assigned to the Marine Corps. That was not a good job.
Oh, I bet.
Out in the field.
Yeah. Did the Marine Corps just need so many medics that they had to bring?
Well, I guess, the Navy and the Marines were together.
Okay.
Unlike the Air Force was by itself, the Army was by itself, but the Marines and Navy shared some stuff.
Okay.
But anyhow, he was assigned to the Marines, so I don't know. He was he was out in the field with those guys. So that's not the rest of the story. When we get, later on, the class of 63 always invited me to their class. I was a 64 grade, and most of them I had a lot of friends in that class. We had 148 kids in our class, and they probably had that many at least. Mm-hmm. It was after, we were the baby boomers. When they got out of the service, they were born in the mid 40s, early 50s. So anyhow, class of 63 always invited me to they'd have it at somebody's house or have it out at the reservoir in Centerville, but they had it at Marge Vanbecker's house. And so I went out there and I met some people that were 63 grads and a couple 65 grads. Mark Sumter was there, and he was a good friend. And so somebody said, "Hey, Steve Groner's walking up the driveway." So I said, "I got to go see him." So I started walking toward him. He saw me, and I looked at him. I said, "You remember where you saw me last?" His words were, "I sure as hell do."
Yeah.
Da Nang in 1969. And he says, "Do you know what?" I said, "What?" He said, "I saw Denny Little that same day." I said, "You're kidding, because I saw him the morning that I saw you in the afternoon." And he said, "Really?" I said, "Yeah. What's the chances of three Centerville grads getting together in South Vietnam?" I said, "It's not very good." So evidently it was okay. So I met my wife in Hawaii. So we stayed there a week, and we stayed in a cabin on the ocean.
Yeah.
And the last day, you just hate to go back, but
right.
You got no choice.
Right.
They'll come looking for you if you don't. So anyhow, things are going along all right. And then I was supposed to leave January 5th of 1970. And on December, I got an early out. I was going to be home for the 27th of December, so I'm getting ready to leave 8 days early. I'm in the latrine shaving because I've been relieved of duty. I didn't have to do anything. I could lay on the bed all day if I wanted to.
Right.
So Sergeant comes in. He said, the guy that I work for, NCOIC, I can't think of it, Phillips, Tech Sergeant Phillips, comes in. He didn't say Sergeant Power. He said, "Jerry, you need to go see the Red Cross." I said, "Really?" So what's going on? "Your mom has had a serious heart attack." I said, "Is she alive?" He said, I don't know, and they won't tell you." I said, "Really?" I said, "Okay." Had 8 days left. So get on the plane, and you ask one of those questions, what's one of your favorite memories? Well, favorite memories were my kids, my wife now. Those are my favorite memories, but some real memories was getting on that airplane on December 19th, 1969. And that plane took off, and you could hear a pin drop. It was so quiet out there. In about 5, 6, 7 minutes, the pilot comes on. We are out of Vietnam airspace, and they saying, we got to get out of this place. There was 100 people in there, at least, in that airplane.
Wow.
So I got to Seattle, the SeaTac airport, Seattle, Tacoma. I called in. I said, Mom didn't make it, did she? She says, nope.
You didn't know till then? Wow.
And then the Red Cross was great at that time.
Right.
They took care of a lot of stuff. And so I got back in December. I got back the same day I left, December 19th, and my mom had died, and the funeral was on the 22nd. And, it's just one of those, it stays with you. I mean, it just stays with you, So memorable moments. One of them was when we got up in the air and out of Vietnam airspace. That's the first one. When I arrived in Des Moines, there was nobody there to greet me except my wife and a daughter, Jill, that's a year and 3 months old, or a year and 2 months old. She didn't even know who I was. But then as soon as I got off that plane, I'm in short sleeves. It's December 19th.
Right.
I got down on my hands and knees, I swear to God, and I kissed that tarmac. I thought, I'm so happy to be here,
Wow.
I'm happy about kids, you are, those are your favorite memories, getting married to somebody you love and have kids that are great. But just stuff like that, I think, my God, I'm home, I'm still alive.
Thank you for listening to episode 1 with Jerry Power. Episode 2 will feature the conclusion of our conversation, where Jerry will talk about his life after the Vietnam War, including meeting his lovely wife Judy, having 3 more children, and starting his own business.
Thank you for listening to Well, What Do You Know? The podcast created to tell people's stories. Everybody's got a story, and every story is worth saving.
The views and opinions expressed in this episode are those of the guest and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Well, What Do You Know podcast, P Square Design, Pagitech LLC, or our sponsors. The Well, What Do You Know podcast, its parent company, and its sponsors are not responsible for any statements made by guests during the recording or publication of this episode.